Right, we're going to give everyone a few minutes to join in, and we're going to get started in exactly 2 minutes. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the City of Grand Prairie's Franchise U program. Franchise U is a program that gives participants everything you need to know about what it takes to be a franchisee. In all of our sessions for the month of June, we cover things like how to buy a franchise, financing options, why you should consider hiring a franchise attorney, and other key considerations. Today, we have Carlos White with us to talk about the legal essentials to franchising, and I will get out of the way. And Carlos, I'll let you take over.
Thanks so much, Kay, and good morning, everyone. I'm glad to be here. A pleasure to talk about some of the general legal considerations related to evaluating franchise opportunities, as well as structuring your business for success. A little bit about me. I'm a transactional attorney that specializes in franchising and corporate law. Currently, I serve as a partner at Lathrop GPM, a firm that was previously named the best law firm in the world by Global Franchise Magazine. I represent a lot of startup and emerging companies in various industries on franchising, corporate, and capital raising matters. And I've been recognized multiple times by D Magazine as one of the best franchise lawyers in Dallas. So one of the things I think it will be helpful, because we talk about legal type information, is that I have prepared notes that I will read from, so that I think that will be helpful. So in the event that you all want to take notes, you can take notes. And definitely at the end, I'm open to answer any questions. So I'm looking forward to it. Let me make sure I have this disclaimer before I move forward. All the information and thoughts provided in connection with this presentation are general in nature and is not and cannot be construed as providing legal or tax advice of any kind. So with that disclaimer out the way, let's get started. One of the things that we need to really understand with respect to franchising is that it's definitely a great business model to grow and scale. I mean, there's been studies that shown that franchise businesses make more than non-franchise businesses, but franchising, as with any business or any distribution model, is not perfect. So it's important in connection when you're selecting or thinking about selecting a franchise concept, you should look for a franchise system with a unique or differentiated product or service. You need to really know what separates this particular concept from a similar concept, and why should you make that investment in the particular concept that you're interested in. Make sure that they have a strong training, supply chain, and marketing support. Really, training, the supply chain, and marketing is really the bedrocks of very successful franchise concepts. The other thing is to make sure that their financial performance is consistent with what you're looking for in an ROI. That's very important, because you have to be profitable in order to pay the fees that's associated with being a franchisee. So I think those are the three things that you really, just generally speaking, when you're looking at a concept, take into account, the product service offered, what differentiates them, training, supply chain, marketing support, as well as can you make money from this particular concept. So the actual document that they will provide in order for you to help make your determination on whether or not to buy a franchise is what we call a franchise disclosure document, or for short, is called an FDD. Before any franchisor can offer or sell a franchise to you, the law requires that the franchisor, which is the concept owner, provide you with this FDD. The FDD must provide all the relevant and important information about the franchise opportunity so that you can make an informed decision as to whether or not to purchase the franchise. The FDD at a minimum will contain legally required disclosures about the franchise business, things such as what is the fee structure? How is the operations? Personal guarantees, all the agreements that you will have to sign in order to be a franchisee. All of that information must be contained in the FDD. And given this, the FDD is a large document. It can run on the short end about 120 pages, and on the long end, for some concepts, is 700 pages. So it's very, very important. Given the legalese that's associated with the FDD, it's imperative that you find a franchise attorney that understands the FDD and understands how to review it. And it's also worth noting that in a state like Texas, it's important that because you don't have as many statutory rights against a franchisor in the event that they have information in the FDD that's incorrect, it's harder for you in a state like Texas to sue against the franchisor. So to avoid having those misrepresentations, it's important to have the franchise attorney take a look at it to see whether or not it's market, as well as negotiate terms that are reasonable so that you'll be in a position to grow and scale your business. So in reviewing the FDD, you should pay particular attention to the following items. What is the reoccurring fee structure? When I say reoccurring fee structure, of course, you're going to pay an initial fee, but then the large majority of franchisors require that you pay a royalty fee and an advertising fee. And typically this royalty fee can be anywhere between 6 to 8% of gross sales, not net sales, gross sales, as well as the advertising fee can run anywhere between 1 to 3%, again, of gross sales. So you're thinking about operating your business, 8 to 9% of your gross sales are already accounted for. That's why it's so important that you identify a concept that aligns with your goals, but is also profitable because based off the system that they provided, they're charging you 9% monthly or sometimes weekly in order to operate your franchise business. Another important thing that you really need to take into account are the site selection and lease requirements. Most franchisors require within X amount of days, 60 to 90 days, that you identify a site that's in accordance with their guidelines. So it's important that you understand exactly what their guidelines, because if you don't know what sites will qualify, then they will not accept that, and the clock is ticking. And if you don't basically find that site within 60 to 90 days, then you'll be in breach of the franchise agreement. So it's so important to understand what are the site selection requirements as well as the lease requirements. A lot of franchisors do not own the property, so that you won't sublease from them. What they would do is give you the criteria similar to the site selection. It's like, look, this is what we look for in the type of locations in which you should operate. You need to go identify that, as well as give us a lease, because we will need to approve it. So that takes times and things of that nature. And of course, there could be a conflict between what you would think is the best option as far as a lease and what the franchisor. But of course, the franchisor is their system, so you're going to adhere to their particular requirements. Another thing to look at is opening requirements. Before you can open the store, a lot of times franchisors will require that you spend grand opening fees, marketing fees, or buy inventory and things along those lines. So it's important to understand exactly what's all the fees and all the requirements so that you have
Right, I think Carlos is frozen on us.
So I think, I'm not sure where I left off, but I think we were talking about the FDD, some of the things that we need to look for in the FDD. We need to make sure the fee structure, you understand that you got to pay off gross sales, royalties, and advertising, site selection and lease requirements to make sure that those are in accord with what the franchisor requires. Opening requirements, making sure that you spend the requisite money on marketing, grand opening, and have all the inventory that the franchisor requires. You want to make sure that you have a term of at least 10 years with a couple of renewals, because you have to be able to recapture the investment that you made, because most franchise investments are, hundreds of thousands of dollars to $1 million, depending on the concept. Termination provisions. In a state like Texas, you don't have much protection. A franchisor can terminate relatively easily if you're not in compliance with your franchise agreement. So it's important that you take a look at what are the provisions in which they can terminate the franchise agreement, and try to negotiate longer cure periods if possible. Litigation, it's important when you have this FDD, they identify the litigation, like the times the franchisor sues or has been sued. That is very important to determine, is this a very litigious franchisor or a lot of franchisees suing? That provides insights on whether or not will be, a concept that's pro-franchisee friendly. Of course, pay attention to the investment related disclosures, because in this FDD, they're going to have to disclose how much it costs to start up your business and operate for 3 months. Make sure that those terms are consistent with other similar concepts, as well as there's something called Item 19, financial performance representations. Franchisors are not required to give it, but they should give it, because these financial performance representations help identify whether or not the revenues and the profitability of the franchise system from others. So those are important things to take a look at. Also, ownership and management requirements, because some owners, franchisees, may want to be passive in nature where they can't be active there all the time. Other concepts require that the owner be there. So you need to determine, with respect to a lifestyle perspective, what's best fits your needs, and make sure that that franchise agreement is consistent with that, and you're not in breach of whether or not the franchisor, if they're going to require you to be active, you can't be passive. You have to be there all the time during the operation hours. So those things are important, as well as from a scaling standpoint, you need to take a look at non-competes. Why is that important? Because, for instance, if I own a fitness center, then you know what? I might want to scale my business and own a vegan restaurant as well, because those two are dissimilar businesses. That's fine. But if I own a fitness center and they say I can't operate any other business, then you can't own that vegan. So you want to make sure the non-competes are only with respect to business that compete against that franchise concept. You should be able to operate other businesses, as long as it's not competitive to the franchisor. So that's in connection with the FDD. So after you finish taking a look at your FDD and you made a decision as to, hey, I'm ready to move forward with purchasing a franchise, the next step is really to structure and finance your entity to scale. And what does that mean? You should always have an entity, whether it's an LLC or a C Corp, or if you make the election as an S Corp, you really need an entity in order to operate. Why? Because that helps limit a lot of your liabilities with respect to third parties. You need to also, if you're going to have partners associated with this business, you need to have strong bylaws if it's a corporation, or if it's a LLC, you need to have an operating agreement that basically specifies what is the ownership percentage that each owner has. How will decisions be made? What happens in the event an owner gets divorced? What happens in the event if an owner's become disabled? Those types of things are important to have if you're going to have other partners, and they need to be highlighted in the operating agreement so that everyone knows exactly upfront what are the requirements in order to operate your particular business. The other thing that a lot of franchisees do not take into account is they really need to incorporate because the franchise agreement is going to have a lot of requirements and the obligations. So they really need to take a look at that franchise agreement, see what are the requirements with regards to reporting. How do you go about reporting to the franchisor? What type of accounting system you need to have set up? How can you transfer ownership if you need to? Those types of things are important that because those types of issues need to be incorporated in your operating agreement, because you want to make sure everything is aligned with that franchise agreement. Because if not, then you could be in a position where the franchise agreement, you could be in default of the franchise agreement and lose your franchise. So you got to make sure that these other ancillary agreements are also in alignment with what the franchise agreement says. Remember, most people, when they buy a franchise, they have to finance it. So either you can there's usually three general buckets regarding financing, a business. One is through loans, traditional bank loans, SBA loans, things along those lines. One is through equity. You might do a private offering where you have other investors. And another one that most people overlook is revenue profit share. So you need to have an idea of all three of those and kind of see which works best for you. And it may be a mixture of all three in order for you to get the requisite financing you need in order to become a successful franchisee. With respect to loans, you do need to negotiate your loan agreement with the bank. Just because they give you the document don't necessarily mean you should sign it. You need to make sure, again, that loan agreement needs to be consistent with the franchise agreement. So you want to make sure that you're negotiating in the loan agreement things that the franchisor is going to require so that you're not in breach of the loan agreement. So be very mindful of that. Things such as, can you pay yourself a salary? Usually in these loan agreements, there's restrictions on the types of salaries or how you distribute profits. You need to make sure that they understand. It's like you need to have a reasonable salary or reasonable distributions in order to survive and grow and scale your company. So those are the types of things that you need to take a look at in negotiating when you find a loan agreement or loan financing. If you decide to do equity, then it's important to recognize that if you raise money from any third party, including families and friends, you have what we call a whole host of federal and state security laws, right? And these securities laws dictate on how you can advertise for capital raising, how you can solicit investors, and what information that you must provide. So anytime you're thinking about raising capital, unless it's like a close family member in which you really trust, you really need to have the assistance of an attorney that recognizes security laws so that you won't run afoul of security laws. Because if you run afoul of security laws, then you could be personally liable even if you sign in the company's name. So next, another important agreement that's very important as far as in the franchise arrangement, usually because most franchise concepts are retail based, you got to open up an outlet, is of course the lease agreement. So again, we got to make sure that that lease agreement aligns with that franchise agreement. So you want to make sure when you're talking to your landlord, provisions like permitted use, how you can utilize the space. It must be consistent and broad enough so that whatever's in the franchise agreement, they say how you can operate, offer and sell products, that needs to be in the lease agreement, as well as how, days of operations, hours of operations. You need to make sure that lease agreement contain those provisions. Signage, franchisor, that's their brand, right? They want to make sure that signage requirements are satisfied. Some other provisions you need to look at when negotiating a lease is, exclusive use. You want to make sure the landlord, if you have a concept like let's say a IV infusion concept, then you want to make sure that the landlord doesn't lease to a competitor that does the same thing, right? So you want to make sure that you have exclusive use provisions in there to avoid that, avoid the landlord basically leasing you to a competitor that can reduce and depress your sales. Most franchisors will also have what we call a lease rider. It's like these are the required terms that the landlord must agree to in order for the franchisor to approve the lease agreement. So you must have that. If you don't, then you'll be in breach of the franchise agreement. So it's important to understand with the leasing strategy, similar to the financing strategy, It all has to align with the franchise agreement. So I think with that, those are the high level issues that one should look at with respect to, acquiring and evaluating a franchise system. And now we would just kind of open it for questions to see if anyone had any thoughts and any questions that I can assist with.
Perfect. Thank you, Carlos, so much. We have one question in the Q&A chat, and you all please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A tab, and Mr. White will answer those. We have a question. Does the company assist in finding the location, or is that the responsibility of the franchisee?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's kind of a mixture of both, but mostly from a franchisor perspective, they're going to give you their specifications on what they look for, but it's the franchisee's responsibility, because a lot of times franchisor, they don't want to be caught in a position where, well, okay, we identified a site for you, and if that site doesn't do well, they say, hey, the reason why I'm not doing well is because the franchisor chose the site. So a lot of franchisors, to avoid that, they just come up with, here are the general guidelines we look for in approving a site, but it's up to you to go out there and identify the exact site that you need to operate from.
Now, Mr. White, if someone wants to hire a franchise attorney, how does that work? Is it based on the franchise they choose, what services they provide?
Yeah, if they're trying to look for a franchise, typically franchise is more specialized legal practice. So any franchisor, any franchise lawyer should have insights to just about any industry. Why? Because you can franchise in the industry. Like for myself, I represent a lot of franchisors, so as well as franchisees, but I've created a lot of these disclosure documents. So you want a franchise attorney that knows what the FDD, so that one can identify whether or not it's market and where our potential traps can be located, as well as building out your infrastructure to make sure that everything aligns with the franchise agreement, as well as balance it so that you can grow and scale your business as well. So.
All right. Are there any hidden clauses that we should look out for in an agreement?
Hidden clauses. It's similar to like a lot of lease agreements and loan agreements. They're pretty what we call, onerous to the franchisee or tenant. Why? It's not because it's an evil thing, but the franchisor has basically put so much time and effort and investment in developing their franchise system that they have to have certain requirements and obligations that's associated with it. I think the most important document, as far as personal, as far as liability, that one needs to look for, because just because you sign an LLC, have an LLC, but if you sign a personal guarantee, then it doesn't matter with the LLC, you're still personally liable. So with that in mind, it's important to get a feel for what is the personal guarantee saying, how long is the personal guarantee, and how can you reduce that personal guarantee. Nearly all franchisors require a personal guarantee. So it's very important to recognize, that you're going in there, that you're going to probably be personally liable for everything that's associated with that particular franchise business. As far as you just gotta termination provisions, that's so important, because you want to protect your revenue stream. So you don't want to be in a position where a franchisor can immediately terminate you just because you made a mistake or you didn't cure a default. We need time, so you need reasonable cure periods. Like usually payments, you have to pay, you should pay within 5 days. But other things that's, as long as it's not affecting someone's safety, you should have 15 to 20 days to cure, because it takes time. This is a 100-page agreement, and you want to make sure that you have time, because mistakes going to occur from time to time in order for you to, to be able to cure that and move forward. And another innocuous thing that most people wouldn't recognize is a lot of franchisors can basically sell their company to third parties. So why is that important? Because you might have a great relationship with the franchisor, but if they're transferred to a third party or some other, company that comes in, you might not have the same type of relationship, and they may want to stick strictly to the letter of the franchise agreement and not provide, leeway that should be provided with a reasonable franchise system. So I think those are some of the things that we need to look for. The most important thing that we need to recognize in franchising is it is a absolutely great business model, and it has created a lot of wealth, and franchise businesses do well. What you're looking for your attorney is not to say no, 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 but it's to trust and verify, right? To make this particular deal such that it works for you so that you can be successful, so that you can be Roland Parrish, so that you can be Son Holden, so that you can be Ampex Brands. All three of those concepts based in Dallas have revenues over 100 million. So it can happen, but you have to be sophisticated and you have to negotiate. You got to have the right professional team to help take you to that level.
Awesome. Carlos, can you own more than one franchise? Like, can you franchise a McDonald's and a Chick-fil-A and 24-hour fitness? Can you?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's funny. I don't know. I mean, this Carlos just individually speaking out behalf of anybody. McDonald's and Chick-fil-A, McDonald's is probably the preeminent franchise or the last 50, 60 years. So they're more of an owner-operated model. It's like, look, we just kind of want you to operate McDonald's, right? You can operate multiple McDonald's, but we want to see you in this, basically active operator, even though some McDonald's operators, may own interest in hotels and hospitality or something along those lines, but it's pretty stringent. Chick-fil-A, it's like, look, it's just franchisor control. You have to be there as a franchisee. You really don't own anything with Chick-fil-A except for cash flows, right? Which can be great because a lot of these Chick-fil-A operators, because the stores do so well, they can make between $500,000 to $800,000, but on the flip end, they can't transfer it to their kids. They don't own any equity, and it's a year-to-year contract. So if the politics change, you lose your ability to continue on and collect that large amount of salary or operating profit. So you have to be mindful. But then you have concepts like Wingstop or Whataburger. Whataburger is one of the best as far as a quick service restaurant, as far as numbers. 2.9 million average revenues, and you get the opportunity to own it. You can sell it. You can transfer it to your kids as long as you're in compliance with the franchise agreement, as well as you can operate other concepts that's not similar. It's like, hey, I own a Whataburger here, but I want to own some Anytime Fitness to help balance it out. So it just depends on the concept, but usually with McDonald's and Chick-fil-A on those types of concepts, they typically want you to be active operator.
That leads myself to another question. When you mentioned about being able to transfer to your kid, with that information on the ability to do that, would that be in the FDD? Where will we find that information to know that we have the ability to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's in the FDD. They have to disclose that. That's a material thing. It has to be in the agreement. It's on the usually transfer of interest. And usually they're going to, most franchisors is silent on it, right? Which means you can't do it. So you should ask about that up front. It's like, look, if I want to transfer this to my kids or transfer to this to the state, we need to amend this franchise agreement so that I can do that. As long as it's a well-meaning, thought out, reason for something, most good franchisors is going to understand that. And they are willing to negotiate on the edges, for even established brands on that. If they're not, then that's a red flag, because that's something that's really not affecting the franchisor's fee structure. It's really not affecting their standards in operations. It's just something that should be, that's pretty reasonable request.
Great information. Are there any other questions? Going once, going twice. Well, thank you all for joining us today. I wanted to make Can you all hear me now? Yes. Okay, great. All right. I just wanted to let you all, make you all aware that we have next week, we have funding your franchise. Speaking in regards to the different ways, Carlos spoke briefly about the importance of knowing how to fund your franchise. Next week we will dive deeper into the different ways you can fund your franchise. I know that sometimes funding is a barrier to franchising. But there are a lot of options, and those options will be shared with us next week. So I hope you all can join us. Thank you so much, Mr. White. I believe we had your information in the presentation, but I've already also sent the presentation out to all the attendees and those that registered. If you just joined via a link, send me an email and I will forward you the presentation. You will also receive a survey to give us feedback on the presentation, the information to help us going forward in our program. So with no further delay, you have 25 minutes of your day back for your lunchtime. Thank you so much, Mr. White.
Thank you.
All right, have a good day, everyone.